recently come in. Just a few things. Welcome to those of you who are listening to us on internet radio. We're really happy to be streaming live with lots of feedback right now. Oh dear. Should I move? No? You're working on it. Okay, that's good. And a word to our sponsors. Thank you very much for supporting us. We count on you. And this event is sponsored by Telecom Canada, the Alberta Science and Research Authority, Bell Globe Media, Canadian Heritage, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the Human Resource Development Department of Canada, Alberta Foundation for the Arts, Alberta Community Development, and Canadian Heritage National Arts Training Contribution Program. Okay, there you go. What I do every day that we meet when there's been a day before is I try and provide a bit of a summary for people who have been here and those who are recently joining us. And I see we have a new person in our midst. Hi, I'm Sarah.
I'm Don Lopez.
Welcome, Don.
From Vancouver.
Great, thanks. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to try and run through, there was a lot that we covered yesterday, and it was an amazing day that kind of went through looking at some of the vision of what technologies could give us in terms of understanding extended bodies and extended minds. Some of the work that has been done over now a 25-year period, really, in terms of Myron's work and some of Galen's work in the field of looking at the body, emotion, the ability of people to communicate in different ways enabled by technology. And then we kind of ended the day with some of the most current research that both artists and also researchers, HIT Lab, for example, are engaged with in terms of looking at how to apply technology in very kind of human adaptive ways to needs. So what I've done is kind of run through what I thought some of the themes were and some of the things that also didn't necessarily come out, and we, in a sense, kind of moved around. So I'll try and compete with that, but I don't know if I can without sort of moving constantly. I think this sort of notion that the body reflects what you know is a really fundamental concept to this event, and it's something that Galen said. And there's many theories of consciousness, but the gaps between what the body knows and how we can express that, what we're allowed to express, what's permitted, and then how through that long process that enters into a social and cultural discourse and becomes reflected or enabled in the process of designing environments, is there's many gaps there. So I think staying grounded somehow in body knowledge through this event, because as I said in my summary of what we're trying to do yesterday, this notion of empathy is a really difficult navigation, negotiation, and I think lots of ideas came out yesterday that are both anti-empathetical, that's not a word, but not that people were sort of raising those as structures, but I was just sort of really interested in the ways that concepts emerge that we need to kind of look at in some ways, with a bit of, at times, toughness, and at other times I think a desire to reach a state of empathy. So the body reflects what you know, but the whole relationship of bodies, and I think this is a point Laura and others made continually, is whose bodies are designed for, and in a sense, which bodies control the process of design. And we talked about things like cultural difference, race, ability, disability, and where in the process of designing and thinking through technologies, different bodies are represented and different kinds of body knowledge is represented. And I think that's something that we need to continually come back to, is how to really engage, even and of course in situations where people are debating what they want and need, because one of the worst things that happens with groups that are, quote, marginalized, unquote, within dominant cultures is that they are represented as unified. And I thought it was really terrific that Laura sort of started her talk by, a number of people again referred to this, started the talk by saying, here's two views or ideas of how we understand disability and who would have spoken these. And we just were immediately confronting our assumptions about speakers and the bodies that represented those speakers. So I think in thinking about empathy, we need to really think through, again, this question of design and which bodies and whose bodies. And so I want to try and keep us returning to that, and I think this morning's panel is going to certainly talk about some of that. What is survival for humans? There's the metaphor of evolution kept coming up many, many times in our discussions yesterday, and I think it was really interesting to me that quantum physics and the new work in probability distribution and the idea of kind of different parallel realities that's currently kind of ripping through the mathematical world and the world of physics. I kind of really appreciated that set of ideas coming up as a side-by-side set of theories and ways of thinking about evolution. And we had dinner. I was celebrating the crash. Although for many of us our stock options and our ability to retire well is now completely decimated, but whatever. I was sort of celebrating the crash at dinner and saying that I thought it had, one could see it as an evolutionary path, but I was sort of seeing it as this huge gap that had opened, breach between the virtual and the virtual economies and its absolute lack of grounding in anything material and that physical bodies need and physical economies need, and this sort of intensification of complete virtuality and mediation versus sort of notions of designing technologies that had human needs in mind, and that kind of technology driver that in a sense opened up that breach is one that kind of needs to be really resolved. And I think now, a few of us at the table are quite optimistic about the kind of return of humanism, or at least a human-centered design process. But attached to that was a kind of relief that the sort of social evolutionary ideology and theories that I know I heard a lot from people who I was quite close to in Silicon Valley, but the ways that they sort of espoused a sort of libertarian ideology around, only the strong survive. And it wasn't a joke, like that's a joke I've been making forever as a kind of social critique that that's the last thing we want in the worlds we're designing, I hope, And what is strong anyhow, and how do we understand that? But this kind of evolutionary, I think we have to really think about what we mean by evolution, and Anita, of course, talked about evolution as diversity, and that we want to look at diversity economies and how we understand that and how we build and design for that. So what is survival for humans? Again, we were talking, and I think this emerged all the way through the day, but survival is the ability to be social, the ability to communicate, the ability to empathize, the ability to, I think being human is the ability to design technologies and tools. That's sort of one of the fundamental things. And then we were talking about the quest for knowledge as being fundamental too. Masuko was talking about, what is it that makes us human in terms of our relationship to learning? And it's something about a desire for knowledge. And so some of those values versus other values. So how do we look at functioning within a fundamentally capitalist set of systems, but with values that are about cooperation and collaboration and so on, and that's very critical when we think about design, which this forum is a lot about, user-based design, empathy within those constructs. I thought it was very interesting the idea that in welfare states, people who have specific sorts of needs that aren't the generalized needs of the society end up being written into a kind of definition or community that's very rigid. And so, again, there's a lot of, these are big issues, and they're not ones we can resolve in a day and a half or 2 days, but I think they're ones that kept coming up. The idea that empathy, or the transmission of one's experience using technologies, and also if one lives in a different sort of bodily construct than someone who, for example, lives primarily in a wheelchair when they're transporting around space, that we are not going to know what that experience is, but we can transmit the experience through a kind of hybridity of knowledge. And I thought, again, with Sid's work, with Sacho's work, we're sort of starting to get this sort of feeling of how you might create a simulation where